we're ready to go. Are we ready to go,
Director?
We are.
Super. So, good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so very much indeed for joining us this morning, for taking an hour out of your very, very busy schedules to join us for this second maritime series of Fenech and Fenech. The first one was organized last year, the first series, and in that series we had, the theme was talking to the industry. So we had a number of subject matters, and we had some pretty interesting speakers who in a traditional webinar fashion would join in and speak to us about the various issues arising in their sector. This year we decided to up the ante somewhat, and we have decided to have our second series, which would be visiting. So as you can imagine, as you can see for yourselves, this morning, our second series webinar is being hosted actually at Malta Freeport Terminals. Malta Freeport Terminals, one of the more important jewels in the crown of Maritime Malta. And I have beside me here, in fact, Alex Montebello, the CEO of Malta Freeport. And thank you so much, Alex, for agreeing to host us here with you this morning. So we are here today, ladies and gentlemen, to discuss sanctions and shipping with some of the key players on the subject in our country. Now, the protagonists in the conduct of international trade have had to operate and navigate through internationally placed sanctions for decades, absolute decades, depending on what was happening on the stage of world politics. Who was falling foul of world order and falling foul of world peace, and generally misbehaving to such a sufficient degree the entire world is enough, hence the sanctions. Of course, the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia is, we all agree, an absolute abomination. No two ways about it. Never in a million years did I think that we would be witnessing today the harrowing scenes of devastation, of cruelty, of inhumanity that we are witnessing today. I would this morning from here, I would like to take this opportunity to tell my dear friends, Denise Rabonizo, who is the president of the Ukrainian Maritime Law Association, and Evgeny Sukachev, one in Kiev and one in Odessa. Evgeny, the president of the Black Sea Law Company in Odessa, and the many, many Ukrainian friends that we have, that we think of you and pray for you every single day. And we hope that we will be able to meet again very shortly in normal circumstances. Obviously, the world has reacted to this by imposing sanctions on Russia. Russian entities, Russian nationals, Russian banks, Russian ships. And so for the next hour or so, I will be sharing with you, our guests here, to whom we will be putting some questions on the subject of sanctions and shipping. And I would very much like to start with Neville Aquilina. And Neville Aquilina, who I have the great pleasure of introducing, is the General Director, Global Issues, International Development, Economic and Cultural Affairs at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and European Affairs and Trade of Malta. Since joining the ministry in 1999, Mr. Aquilina served both Malta and abroad and represented the ministry at international conferences and events in various capabilities and capacities. In 2012, he served as Director at the European Affairs Division and in 2015 appointed Director General. However, to home in on subject matter, in 2015, Neville was appointed as Chair of the Sanctions Monitoring Board, and in this capacity, he was at the forefront in the drafting of new sanctions law that govern, amongst other things, the scope of the Sanctions Board. This law solidified the Sanctions Board's role as the supervisory authority, one which regularly liaises with MFSA, MGA, FIAU, which are regulatory bodies in Malta, and we will therefore be speaking to Neville in his capacity as Sanctions Monitoring Board. So my first question to you, Neville, is this. And I would really like you to set the scene for this event. As chairman of the Sanctions Monitoring Board, can you explain to the participants at our webinar, and there are many, many of you this morning, what is the role actually of the Sanctions Monitoring Board and yours as chair of the board, and how does the board actually go about implementing sanctions? I think that is really important for us to understand how this pans out. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fenech, Chair, and I join you, and I fully support the messages that you have sent in your opening speech, in your opening remarks. As you rightly mentioned, I've been the chair of the Sanctions Monitoring Board since 2015. I didn't know what I was going to at that time, but we learned a lot of lessons. And as a jurisdiction on sanctions, we have a very much a joined up approach. And as a result of the Russian aggression, we now have perhaps an unprecedented sanctions regime, EU sanctions regime, very complex, very comprehensive, and it's a big test for our jurisdiction. It's a big test, but thanks to the knowledge we have gained over the years, also implementing the Libya sanctions regime, which is near home, I must say that generally speaking, Maltese operators are much more informed than they were when I joined the Sanctions Monitoring Board in 2015. So basically, you mentioned the law. When we took over, our predecessors did a fantastic job, but the world has changed and continues changing. So you need to adapt very fast, or else you are an opportunity cost for the jurisdiction. And the first thing we started working on was to update the laws. Let me explain. So in Malta, we implement the UN and EU sanctions. What used to happen before was that when the Security Council or the European Council, when they issued sanctions, there was a very lengthy process and bureaucratic process, whereby it took 2 to 3 days to get these implemented in Malta. And of course, in the first hours, I must say, not day, hours, there's the so-called capital flight. So we were totally sort of, because the world was changing very fast, we were totally not compliant with ensuring that there's no capital flight upon sanctions being imposed. So what we did was to introduce the direct applicability. So when the Security Council decides, 1 second after, it's law in Malta. Not even 1 second after, bang, and that applies also to the EU. Malta has become quite a sophisticated jurisdiction, I must say, and there are so many niches, so it's important to have everybody on board. So what we did was to widen the membership of the Sanctions Monitoring Board. And of course, we all know that the broader, the shallower. So that was quite a challenge. So what we did was we are now 18 members, and going up in the next review of the law, which will happen hopefully by this year, we'll go to 22 members. But we never meet, all the members never meet more than twice annually. What we do is we meet focus groups. We have a lot of focus groups between the members themselves, focusing on cases, focusing on areas, and this has helped us to be very agile and to address challenges that we have. When there's a sanctions hit in Malta, when there's a crisis in Malta in the field of sanctions, it's not a problem. We just need to get ahead of it. So what we do, we bring everybody on board, 4 or 5 authorities, we decide, and then we act. And in this manner, we further the national interest because we keep the problems out of our jurisdiction. If a problem comes in, we deal with it effectively and efficiently, and we have an opportunity to work with the industry. We're very few at this. There's a sanctions unit. I head it. We're very few, so we can't hire all the people in Malta to work in the sanctions unit. So what we're doing is public-private partnerships, and they are the best solution. I mean, the more people are educated on sanctions, the more our jurisdiction is secure. We're as strong as the weakest link. So basically, this is, I know that I don't want to take a lot of your time. but just to give a very, very broad explanation, and then I can go into what the law says and the risks and the risk factor. I don't know if I have enough time, but
Yes, of course.
And basically, apart from the direct applicability of sanctions, what we now have is also we included Article 17.6, we call it, because it's true, it's 76. Basically, we're putting an onus on operators in Malta to do their due diligence. Nowadays, times have changed so much that there are a lot of risks. Even as Sanctions Monitoring Board, the first thing we did when we sat down to start our work was to identify the risks. If you don't know the risks, you cannot handle. For example, today I came late because I got stuck 20 minutes in traffic. So I didn't put in any mitigating risks. I should have departed from my work 30 minutes earlier. So in sanctions,
You were still in time.
yes, I was still in time, but in sanctions, I do not do this. I mean, I have my mitigating measures and I do them. For example, we see as risks for Malta, our geographical position. I have listed them down so as not to forget any of them. Our proximity to sanctioned countries, Libya, our sizable ship registry, which is we are a prestige flag, but the risks are there. The financial services, and the fact that we are such an open economy with lots of people coming over in Malta, and it's great. But of course, according to the FATF standards, the FATF doesn't tell you, look, don't go into risk areas. No, it says go into risk areas, but please be sure that you can manage the risks. And that's what we're doing, informing the sectors, working with the sectors in partnership, and this public-private partnership is crucial. Without it, we have to work together.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Neville. I'm sure you will all agree, ladies and gentlemen, that really sets the scene in terms of what we are talking about, in terms of what the Sanctions Monitoring Board does and how it goes about actually doing its business. And so thank you for that insight, because although so many of us know about the existence of the board and what the board is supposed to do, very few of us really have the opportunity perhaps to understand the makeup and the composition of the board, etc. I would now like to turn to Captain David Bugeja on my left. Captain David Bugeja, for the Maltese participants, and he does not need any introduction, particularly those in the shipping sector, of course, because we all know him as the harbour master. But I must tell you exactly who David Bugeja is. As a master mariner by profession, he started his seafaring career in 1978 as a navigation officer cadet and spent 18 years serving on seagoing commercial vessels, mostly liner services and high-speed passenger vessels. In 96, he moved ashore, and since then he has occupied various management positions in shipping, both in Malta and overseas. He joined the Malta Maritime Authority in 98 as a senior port officer and deputy harbour master, and was later promoted to harbour master. In January 2010, government, through an act of parliament, established a new agency responsible for all modes of transport in Malta, Transport Malta. And Captain Bugeja was appointed as chief officer for Ports and Yachting Directorate within Transport Malta. The directorate carries out the functions of Port Authority and harbour master, which is why we still refer to him as the harbour master. He is a member of the European Seaports Organization Executive Committee and General Assembly, and was the chairman of the ESPO Maritime Affairs and Security Committee for several years. David represents Malta at the IMO Facilitation Committee, the FAL, that deals with matters relating to the facilitation of international maritime traffic, and also at EU high-level and official meetings. So, David, we've heard the role of the Sanctions Monitoring Board. We've just heard Neville say that one of the functions is to responsibilize service providers, to get them to carry out due diligence. Now, where does that leave Transport Malta? How does Transport Malta feature in all of this?
Well, good morning to everyone who is watching us, and I join you in the message in support of Ukraine. Well, in our specific function as the Port Authority and Harbour Master's Office, we are the interface with all the ships that are arriving in Malta, be it to do port calls for cargo or services, but also, as was mentioned also by Kevin, we are quite a service-oriented industry, and we also have numerous ships coming to Malta to be rendered services in our anchorages and in our approaches. And this is where we fit in as the authority that needs to give clearance to whether the ship proceed into our waters or not. And what the new sanctions have meant is that we needed to revisit the way of how we do this due diligence, this pre-monitoring, because as you and everyone in the industry are aware, in previous sanctions, when it came to the function of the port authority, be it for a refusal of access or a sanctioned vessel or shipping line, the information was pretty straightforward, sometimes even with specific names of ships, so it was all black and white. But with the sanctions and the UBO, it is quite a different matter. So the first game changer for us was we needed to revisit the way how we conduct due diligence, how we conduct risk assessments to obtain professional services in intelligence, and that was our first area that we needed to address. And I think what is also important is that we have this, what I call disposable access, that we are always available, and someone like the chair of the monitoring board is readily available to assist us in the clarification and to assist. And obviously, our other area is that we are the interface with the industry. So sometimes we need to rope in or guide industry so that we are all on the same page and doing the due diligence and checking what ships can be cleared and which ships may be subject to sanctions, in which case we obviously need to do the unfortunate decision where we have to not allow such ships to either come to Malta or to be rendered services by local operators, the two core areas that we need to manage as a Port Authority and Harbour Master's Office.
Thank you, David. We still have a little bit more time left for you now, and perhaps I'll introduce. Perhaps you'd like to give our audience a little bit of background with regards to, say, the port notice. Obviously, I mean, most people in Malta are speaking about your port notices as they emerge, and I've got before me the latest port notice, sanctions and restrictive measures. Perhaps, you'd like to spend a couple of minutes to explain this port notice.
Yes.
What the most important parts of it are, and what your expectations are of the service providers. I know that amongst us today, we have a number of ship agents, we have a number of people who are service providers, so they look at your port notice. I think it would be helpful for them to hear it from the horse's mouth as to what you expect of them.
By all means, I think the first important thing is that when we, as the authority, in our specific function as the Port Authority, are promulgating port notices or notices to mariners, because the two provide an information to the industry and to the stakeholders. It does not necessarily mean that it is purely our competence, but we are the agency that interface with industry. And I think in this particular case, the main objective of the port notice is to make the industry more aware of obligations that exist, of the functions and the legal framework through which the Sanctions Monitoring Board operate, and where they can find information, which is always being updated on the Sanctions Board website. So our job with the port notice is a sort of eye-opener, a wake-up call to the various operators, be it ship agents, be it ship operators, be it ship owners, be it ship managers, be it service providers. We know that, for example, when it comes to services, be it ship repair facility, be it bunkers, but also not only to make them aware of their obligations, but also of the risks, because sometimes in a service provider, being very keen not to lose business and not to still offer a service, then he is also risking being sanctioned himself, or ending up with a financial situation that he cannot manage. So the issue of port notices, and obviously this is like previously we were issuing notices related to COVID.
Yes.
Again, we were promulgating the information on behalf of the health authorities. So this is the main objective of port notices, is that the industry is now waiting for a port notice as a focal point for them. And we always try to interface. Again, we are part of government as a lead government authority. And then we have also the facility that through our ministry and through Foreign Affairs, we can interface between our key clients, stakeholders, service providers, and the relevant competent authorities.
Well, thank you very much for that, David. I mean, as a service provider, I cannot really overstate the importance of the guidance that we receive. Because of course, everybody has access to the internet, everybody has access to the EU regulation, everybody has access to the UN sanctions, etc. But it does make a difference when all of this information is put together in a succinct manner because it offers guidance. It's a point of reference. I now turn to our host, Mr. Alex Montebello. And Alex was appointed CEO of Malta Freeport Terminals in 2014, but he started his career here in 1989. That's quite some time ago, Alex. At the time of the company's very inception, and has since then occupied various positions within the company. In his early days as an IT specialist, Alex was responsible for implementing the terminal operating systems alongside the company's development and expansion. And as if any of us need to know what it takes to run that sort of operation. But even this view of what is going on at the moment would give us some idea of the complexities behind operating terminal systems. So that must be a huge feather in your cap, Alex. Following this, Alex was in charge of the business development of the terminals and the negotiations with shipping lines, resulting in Malta's Freeport's client mix. Alex was then appointed director responsible for operations at the terminal, and he also serves as a board member on the Malta Maritime Forum. So Alex, we've heard what the deal is from the Sanctions Monitoring Board. We've heard how Transport Malta acts as the facilitator, as the liaison between the service provider and the Sanctions Monitoring Board. Now I turn to you as an operator. You are operating this terminal and you're faced with implementing the sanctions. How would typically Malta Freeport react? What goes through your mind? What do you do as Malta Freeport when you have this situation?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I also extend my message, which Anne introduced at the beginning of this webinar, by passing on our solidarity to the people in Ukraine, in particular, our colleagues at the Brooklyn Kiev terminal, container terminal in Odessa. The practicality point of view of the sanctions cannot be described in a more clearer way than the example that we have today behind us. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting the CMA CGM Trocadero. It's a 23,000 TEU vessel. Yes. LNG operated. So in terms of CO2 emissions, this is one of the cleanest vessels, container vessels sailing on the French Asia line, and it is owned and operated by CMA CGM. CMA CGM is also our shareholder and is our major client. What happens when a vessel like the CMA CGM Trocadero calls at our facility? First of all, in view of the sanctions and the port notice issued by Transport Malta, we do the checks in relation of the flag registration of the vessel, the owners of the vessel, the operators, and the charterers of the vessels. And this is all information which is not accessible freely online, but we have to source this information through a paid service, and we do this exercise in order to conform to the sanctions on each and every vessel call, be it the CMA CGM Trocadero, be it the smallest feeder that we have calling at our facility. This process is undertaken vigorously and in line with the port notice issued by Transport Malta. It gets a bit more complicated when we speak about cargo. because in today's world, everything is transmitted in terms of information through EDI. EDI is controlled by UN Council for Trade and Development, and this is an agreement that each and every line would have with the terminal in terms of exchange of data. And the data which is transmitted from the shipping line directly to the terminal is related to operations, to operational requirement of the terminal. So we would get the container number, the port of discharge, the weight of that container, whether it has any hazardous goods, the size of the container, and the outbound carrier. Which vessel is going to load eventually that container after it being discharged. The information related to the bill of lading and the contents of the container is transmitted directly from the shipping line or its respective agent in Malta to the local authorities. And therefore, there is a distinction between the vessel call and the cargo operations.
So there's no two ways about it, though. I would imagine that from a purely operational point of view, once there are sanctions, and I suppose different sanctions, we have a couple of minutes more for this question. I suppose there would be a difference, or is there? I'm just asking. I mean, I recall, for instance, when Freeport had the issue related to the Irison line calling.
Yes.
Do you see any difference in the implementation of those sanctions then to the implementations of the sanctions against Russia?
Yes.
Perhaps you can give us a few thoughts on that.
Yes, there are differences in the sense that, as Neville rightly explained, the due diligence process is now being undertaken by private operators as well. Whilst at the time of Irisil, the onus of the implementation of the sanctions was purely on the authorities and exclusively on the authorities. There is a huge difference for Malta Freeport terminals in the impact from the sanctions. The impact on the sanctions on Iran were huge on Malta Freeport because Irisil was our second largest client at the time. And practically after the sanctions were imposed, Irisil stopped calling not only in Malta, but also in the other European ports in respect of the sanctions in force at the time. The sanctions on Russia are impacting Malta Freeport to a lesser extent because we do not have any client which is Russian, and therefore the impact, yes, the impact is really into we'll talk about Odessa at a later stage.
Yes, that's the next second round.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Alex. That's very, very, very interesting. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Sönke Stein. And Sönke is the managing director of EVOS Malta. Sönke, and has been since November 2021. He held the position of CEO of the Malta terminal prior, of course, as we all know, Sönke, to the sale by Oil Tanking to EVOS, which was the company running the terminal until November 2021. And he has been with Oil Tanking in Malta since 2014. And he held the same position in Malta even before that, between 2001 and 2006. So you see, he didn't have enough of us, he just had to come back. Before returning to Malta, he worked for the Oil Tanking Group in the Middle East from 2006 to 2014, heading Oil Tanking's local joint venture oil storage terminal at Jebel Ali in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Simultaneously, he was responsible for the business development of the group across the Middle East and Africa. Sönke has been working in the oil industry since 1993 and was successfully involved in developing business for the Oil Tanking Group. He has managed a variety of oil tanking subsidiaries in multiple geographical locations. The change of ownership to the EVOS Group will enable him to guide the Malta terminal to play a major role in the energy transition within the central Mediterranean. Now, Sönke, of course, you're oil, you store oil, and all of us read about the challenges taking place in implementing sanctions precisely in the context of the area in which you are operating. So perhaps you would like to tell us, how do you, as a responsible industry operator in your very delicate sector, deal with compliance, ensure compliance. We've heard it all now, from sanctions to the transport to another service provider. At the end of the day, it's compliance. What effects? I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you deal with compliance and what effects do the current sanctions actually have on your business?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here on this panel, and thanks for inviting me. Also, my solidarity to the Ukraine industry as well. We all know why we're sitting here. Yes, sanctions. I mean, sanctions is nothing new. I mean, oil is a very valuable commodity. Oil makes the world today, most of the world go around. So it is naturally a commodity that is a very easy target for sanctions as well. So, and a very effective target. So if you look at the situation today, it's not really new to us. We are known to work under sanctions and to comply as well. We need to. We had Iran, we had Libya, and we still do have. So this is literally nothing new. What is different for us today in this scenario, at least what we feel today, is that it touches a variety, and it touches a very important stream, especially being in the center of the Mediterranean. A lot of Russian oil is a core commodity going through. But let me start somewhere else. It actually starts from the very beginning with my client. We are a warehouse. We are running an oil storage facility. We do not own oil ourselves, so we render a service as well. So if I have a client who wants to rent a tank with me, the first thing as a responsible operator, because the onus is on me, I need to make sure that this person is not sanctioned by itself, or is subject to sanctions, or the owner is not subject to sanctions. We all know there are a lot of people in the oil industry who are Russian. Does it affect our business from a client base today? As of today, no. But as part of the EVOS group, we do have Russian clients in the larger scheme of things. So it starts with the client. Then I need to have a look at what is the product that he is intending to trade. Where is the origin? Where is it coming? Is it going to come to Malta? I'm the warehouse holder. I'm the license holder. So I need to make sure that whatever comes here is allowed to be brought here. Is it the right quality, right origin? Is the company who is producing it maybe sanctioned, and so on and so forth. Step number 2 is it comes on a vessel always, right? So is the vessel sanctioned? Also, that needs to be checked very carefully. Then the next step is eventually it's going to get sold. Who's the client on the other end? Which country is it going to? So if you see the many touch points that are there as a responsible operator, and I say responsible because we are, it is highly complex to really figure out what is going on. And Alex, you mentioned, yeah, we live in an electronic world. We need to have services because we also need to react fast. Time is of the essence. In the oil business, I mean, when you get a price for oil for our clients, 20 minutes matters, 10 minutes matters. So sometimes they make decisions based on that. So we need to source the right services and have right access to the right information in order to make responsible decisions as well. Starting with the client when we onboard him into our systems, and that goes to all our vendors, not only our storing clients, that goes also to material suppliers, people that sell us pipes, steel, cable, everything. So from a business perspective, we have a big impact on us today. What we need to do, we have the systems in place. Also law firms like yours, for example, they assist us in the vetting of clients, in the vetting of ships as well. So thankfully enough, we have advanced. So with this last round of sanctions, also what we're going to see, we have better means to comply. I'm quite happy, and actually with the authorities and the help of the authorities, the way we're set up, I believe we are well set up to comply. And it will still continue to affect our business. We have to be aware of it. There's nothing we can change about it. So that's in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Sönke. And I think it always helps. There are so many service providers who are listening to this. And to a certain extent, and Neville did hint to this earlier, it's a lot of the success, the implementation of the sanctions, etc., is very heavily dependent on the sharing of information, on what service providers are doing, what is available, what are the tools available out there. And this was also one of the reasons behind this webinar, to show persons who are actually tuning in what similar service providers are doing, and that it is perfectly possible to actually execute this level of compliance in an orderly fashion, which makes for better organization and makes for better compliance through, but even Sönke mentioned, David, through the fact that they work very much hand in hand with the authorities. And I think we have to say this, one of our tremendous advantages in working in our jurisdiction is that the authorities are always there in order to guide accordingly. Do you find that, Sönke? He's here, he's right next to me. So if you need to tell him, you can tell him.
I don't only see him in the boardroom, I do also speak, and we are, I mean, my people are in daily, in hourly contact with the authorities. As I said, time is of the essence, and we really put all effort in that we all communicate and we come to decisions. And if we do not have an agreement, then we have to hold it and stop and find a solution, or we have to say no. It's a very simple story. But I think, and I really truly believe that the approachability is second to none. I really have to say that.
Yeah, that's good to hear and good to know, and we're very heavily dependent on it, actually. So now come to the last speaker in this first round, and the last speaker in this first round is Dr. Adrian Attard. Dr. Adrian Attard is one of my partners at Fenech Fenech, and a very important part of the Marine Litigation Department, I hasten to add. He has a wealth of experience in handling maritime claims, ranging right across the board. Whatever happens, Adrian can deal with it, more or less, whether it's wet or dry, disputes ranging from collisions to salvage and from insurance claims to bunkering disputes. He regularly deals with ship arrests, mortgage enforcement, and judicial sale of vessels. Adrian also focuses on marine debt recovery and the enforcement of foreign judgments and arbitral awards in Malta. He graduated from the University of Malta in 2009 and holds a master's degree in international maritime law conferred by the International Maritime Law Institute. He was admitted to the Maltese bar in 2009, and in 2019, Adrian obtained his PhD from Queen Mary University in London. He is on the executive committee of the Malta Maritime Law Association and a guest lecturer at the University of Malta. Now, Adrian, as I'm sure most people would be interested to hear, we've heard the Sanctions Monitoring Board, Transport Malta, the regulator, service providers. You and I know that whenever there are sanctions, there are issues. 90% of international trade is carried by sea. So clearly, we've come across there's so much practical fallout resulting from sanctions. So what I would like you to do in these few minutes is to give our listeners some practical examples of, in fact, the legal issues which have arisen out of shipping contracts in the context of sanctions, in the context of the world of sanctions.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for the introduction. And I too share, obviously, your message of solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Yes, I mean, obviously, the situation, the conflict, and the ensuing sanctions have raised a lot of contractual issues. And of course, we came across a lot of disputes where parties were trying to terminate their contractual obligations to try to ease financial burdens or to mitigate losses, or even, alternatively taking an opportunistic approach and trying to get a better deal on the market. However, this happens whenever there are changes in the market, so it's not limited to this situation. The actual conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions have, however, brought to fore a re-evaluation of the choice of clauses used in contracts and issues of interpretation. And we've come across this a lot within the context of charter parties. So obviously, within the first few weeks of the conflict, trade in and out of Ukraine came to a standstill. And charterers and ship owners were, opening their files and looking back at the charter parties and seeing what they had agreed upon and what their rights and obligations are in the prevalent circumstances. And one of the first things they would look for is a war risk clause. Now, generally speaking, a war risk clause is a law that caters for what would happen when there's an outbreak of war or a similar war-like situation. Now, the problem is not all the clauses are the same. Of course, they have different variations and different clauses. Some of them gave the parties an outright right to terminate the charter party, so that was an easy way out. However, others simply gave the master the right to reject, to proceed to a port in a war zone or a war risk area. However, there have been some where the master is not even allowed to refuse, provided the owner can get suitable war risk insurance. And that has left, some owners scratching their head and saying, what am I going to do? Also, the Black Sea. The Black Sea has now, is a commonly used trading area. I mean, there's so many ports and so many commodities that pass through there. And another issue which has come to fore is the question of safe port. Under most charter parties, in most charter parties, a ship can only be ordered to proceed to a safe port. And now the issue has come back to, what is a safe port? Are we limiting it to the physical port? No, it also entails the route towards that port. So if, for example, a vessel has to stop in the Black Sea and has to pass dangerously close to Maripol, is that a safe port? And apart from the physical risk, there's the political risk. And now with the sanctions, there is also the risk as whether, you could end up detained or sanctioned. So again, these are all issues which are coming to fore as a result of the sanctions. Now, the sanctions themselves have also put, unfortunately, a lot of contractual parties in a difficult situation because it's quite frankly put them between a rock and a hard place. Because on one hand, you have the performance of the contract, which could lead to a breach of sanctions. And on the other end, non-performance might be tantamount to a breach of contract. And so the obvious choice is there's no option. You cannot breach sanctions. So the problem arises, what are the liabilities for a party who cannot perform its obligations? And within, again, the context of charter party, this has arisen a lot. And again, the charter parties and owners are revisiting the charter parties, and the first thing they would look for would be a sanctions clause. Now, most standard form charter parties don't actually have a sanctions clause in them, and these are usually added as a rider clause by the parties. And a sanctions clause effectively allows a party to terminate the contract if the other party becomes hit or becomes a designated entity. But if there isn't this clause, what can a charterer do or an owner do to get out? So they would be looking at the other existing clauses, such as, the force majeure clause. Can an incident which occurred of sanctions fall under the force majeure? And it's not that simple. It's, you'd have to see first you'd have to look what the governing law clause is, because, different legal regimes have different interpretations on clauses and the different applications. You'd also have to look at the way the clause is actually worded or constructed. You'd have to see, for example, with force majeure, if there is a particular event which gives rise to you to invoke that clause. Is sanctions under there? And if not, can you pigeonhole the incident under something else, such as an act of government or, the more blanket other similar events? It's brought a lot of questions, to the fore of legal discussions. And I think in months and perhaps years to come, we are going to be, probably around this table again, discussing judgments, awards, decisions, giving some insight into this. But I think right now, at least in my opinion, the industry should be forward thinking when it comes to this matter. In other words, I think every economic operator should be revisiting, the standard contracts they have used up until today or until recently, and really evaluate them to see whether they have included all the necessary clauses therein, the war risk clause, the sanctions clauses, and that gives them the protection that they need in these unprecedented times when we're seeing so many sanctions at so many different levels, in international, regional, national bodies, and in such a short period of time. I mean, the bottom line is you have to really revisit your contracts to make sure you're well protected.
Thank you, Adrian. I think you've done very well in the few minutes that we were given. And I think you've really highlighted how complex it is, what an enormous amount of problems can arise, and that the message and the moral of the story really is be prepared. You know, as you said, you need operators can no longer take the view, we'll deal with it when it happens. They need to be prepared in advance to make sure that the contract actually protects their position and their situation. Round two now. The follow-up question to what you've said, and now we have a very broad idea of, you know, how the industry is reacting to this, Neville, is how do you go about dealing with breaches of the sanctions? So let's assume Alex here has done nothing of what he said he did, and there's a breach. How does the sanctions monitoring board come into this equation? And I am not remotely suggesting, of course, for 1 minute that it does that, because I know they are super careful. But
all the people around this table, I must say, and that all the people around this table, we've seen some remarkable reactions to the sanctions being imposed. I mean, it's not easy. It's a perfect storm what we're passing through. Not only Malta, but all Europe and perhaps the world. And if you allow me to start, we've noted that, as I said, there were niches in our industry, there were segments in our industry who really performed well, or rather, in the face of all the adversities, they knew how to ride the wave. Others simply de-risked. They just switched the lights off of their business. And it shows that they were unprepared. And that's what we've been telling all around, not because we do it because it's our job. Be prepared. When the storm will hit you, we're living in such a sophisticated environment that you cannot just, as you said, let's take a contract and then we'll see how it goes. It's not like that. So when there is a breach and breaches happen, my advice is, first and foremost, the law says that you have to report it to the Sanctions Monitoring Board. We are still a Sanctions Monitoring Board, but if you look at our laws, the powers we have, the powers given to us by Parliament, by Malta, are enormous, and not because we're some sort of regime or have autocratic vision of how the world should, but because it's a very serious offense. So, for example, we're here at the Freeport. The people around the table might know what case I'm referring to. It's very easy for the Sanctions Monitoring Board to just stop a ship, order the stopping of a ship here, and it remains in the berth 12, 14 hours extra, losing a lot of contracts. Of course, it creates a lot of problems and insurance issues, but we do it because Malta is a member of the United Nations, and the foremost role of the Security Council is to ensure international peace and security. And as a country, we cannot afford any instance of Malta being sort of in breach or acting nonchalance against a rules-based international system. So when we get a breach, operators have the obligation to report it to us, the banks. We have a public-private partnerships with the banks. We did it so that when we ask information to the banks, I don't need to wait 48 hours for that information to I receive it after 1 minute. And the banks are incredibly supportive, and the banks are the first line of defense. Of course, David is on the Sanctions Monitoring Board, Transport Malta, Freeport is in there also through Transport Malta. There are all the parties there. So when you get a breach, you need to get ahead of it. You need to get ahead of it. My advice, based on these years and on the people we prosecuted and we took to court, is the police that takes people to court, but we go there, we present the case to the police and they investigate, is be frank with us. Be honest. Be honest, it's not the proper word. Be open.
Transparent.
Transparent. Tell us what your problem is. We will help you. we don't like people rotting in jail just because they weren't educated or criminals. Yes, I mean the criminals have to.
With the criminal intent, you're
Yes,
making a
with the criminal
distinction.
intent, that's totally unforgivable. And those people have to give back to society. We cannot allow our jurisdiction to be undermined in any way. This is a very strong message. I was doing an outreach event like this in a closed room of 30 people, and it was on the arms embargo. And I told them, look, guys, it's far easier for you to commit a crime in here and you get away with it, rather than committing a crime on the high seas, because there is the financial transaction. It stays there. There are the drones flying everywhere. It's incredible the information we receive as sanctions monitoring board, not from Maltese authorities only, but from abroad. We're very connected. We do it to protect everybody. For example, somebody mentioned Libya and the oil. We have an insurance there. We have relations with certain parties to ensure that products coming in Malta are not bad products, are not problematic products. So basically, we do impose fines. The money we get from for those in the industry who do not have systems in place, I don't expect a baker to have systems in place to check his clients, but I would expect from a company employing 30 people doing business with abroad. So we do find when there are no systems in place, the money doesn't go as an income, but we reinvested in education. Education is the most powerful tool, in my view. And then, of course, if there are breaches, it's a criminal offense. In Malta, it is a criminal offense. It's incredible. For example, now the EU is thinking of making it across Europe that the sanctions breach is a crime. But in Malta has been like this since 2018. So we're very advanced. And the results and the respect we have abroad is because we're a serious jurisdiction on sanctions for sure, and in many other areas. In shipping, it's a really, there's so much sophisticated understanding in Malta. Of course, we have our Vid Pardo, Law of the Sea, he's the father of the Law of the Sea, but we have remarkable people, remarkable personalities who have contributed so much, and we have such an important role globally to set the standards even higher, and we're setting the bar, and this is so great.
Thank you, Neville. I think that's very good. Thank you for explaining. I think you were crystal clear in terms of where the board stands, in terms of what the effects of sanction breaching is, in terms of you explaining the difference between an intentional and unintentional and education. So thank you very much for that. David, next question. I am sure that there are situations, I know of them, where ship agents will come to you and say, I've got this situation here. I need your guidance. What is the position of Transport Malta when that happens?
Well, I think...
Well, I would like to excuse to our viewers. I know we're running slightly late. We're going to overstep the 1 hour, but it doesn't matter because I'm sure you all agree it's a great answers from this panel.
I think one thing that we all have to keep in mind is the particular EU approach to these sanctions, which are continuously evolving, with another round. And we have had situations where we're discussing something in the evening and it's published in the official journal by 12 o'clock the following morning. So we had this area where industry or someone, a ship agent, would call us on something. And the first thing we would have to say, you're talking about the older sanctions, there are new ones now in place. As I said before, we have stepped up our own internal procedures and tools, which, as we mentioned, there are commercial services, I would say reliable, reputable services available now that makes our job a bit easier. With the agents, the first message is we're not here to make you lose business or to prohibit shipping operations in Malta. However, when there is a reality and we double check our sources and we see where the situation is such that our interpretation, also sometimes with consultation, is that this particular client, be it directly or UBO, etc., we have information, then we have to be a little bit hard and we have to be always on the side of caution and certain ships may be refused based on information, based on explanation. But what I think is also important is that even the role of a ship agent or a service provider at sea is evolving and it's changing. And I think it's not us as operators, as regulators, as the big terminals, you know, we have representatives here of the bigger terminals. The fact that you are small does not exclude you from this responsibility. So be it a ship agent who is getting your first ship for the first time or established, all have to be responsible and need to have their own measures and their own due diligence procedures in place. We're there to help, but when our interpretation is such, then we take the decision in the right manner.
Good. That is what I take away from your answer, David, which I think will give agents a lot of comfort, is the fact that, you know, running a day-to-day agency, running an operation, I am sure there will be situations where they're simply uncertain about the situation. So it's very important that the service provider, the agent in this case, knows that he can pick up that phone and actually liaise with the authorities for guidance.
Absolutely.
So that's very good. Thank you. Alex, Odessa, we know that Malta Freeport has a very special link with Odessa, right in the middle of it all at the moment. So can you tell us, can you explain to us what is going on there?
Well, there are
Your direct feedback.
there are two direct links with the port of Odessa. First of all, when the container terminal Brooklyn Kiev was being set up in Odessa, we have participated through the supply of human resources to the port of Odessa in areas of particular expertise, be it infrastructure, operations, and ISO certification. So Malta Freeport Terminals forms part of Terminal Link, which is 50% shareholder of Malta Freeport Terminals, whilst the other 50% belongs to the Yield, to the Turkish shareholder. So from the 50% of Terminal Link, we did supply our expertise, our wealth of experience through management and middle management experience at Malta Freeport, since we have been operating in the sector for many, many years. So there is a particular link with the port of Odessa because we know the people there, and we are still in contact with these people on a regular basis. The other link with the port of Odessa is a service, I think Adrian mentioned in particular the Black Sea. There is a particular service which is operated by CMA, CGM and COSCO, which links the Mediterranean to Black Sea. And on the port rotation of that particular service, there is obviously Odessa. Through the Black Sea service, we transshipped last year over 20,000 containers from the port of Odessa directly being transshipped to Malta Freeport. So it has particular significance even in terms of trade. Obviously today, the port of Odessa is closed, so those containers are being shifted to other neighboring ports, be it Constanza, be it other Turkish ports. But it is a situation which is, from a human level, it is very disturbing to say the least.
Thank you, because I'm sure a number of our webinar participants this morning perhaps didn't know of the more than just a casual relationship with Odessa. I mean, it's one thing for Malta Freeport to actually handle containers as a transshipment port that comes from Odessa, but quite another to know that you had such a direct role in the setting up of this port there. And I'm going to take this to a little bit, 2 minutes, 1 minute, to the human level. What are your feelings when you see all of this going on? And no doubt you have been there yourself, you have visited yourself, presumably. You've met the people there. Can you believe what's going on? I mean,
well, myself, I have not been to the port of Odessa, but the number of people who went there, and as I mentioned, are still in contact with the people in Odessa who were managing the terminal, the container terminal facility up until a few weeks ago. So there is this relationship, there is this exchange of expertise between the two facilities, and through this exchange of expertise, obviously you build relationships. And these relationships are relationships which go beyond the professional level. And today we are seeing more and more the human level and the human necessities of the terminal in Odessa.
Thank you for that, Fenech. Thank you for the human side to this, I think, unprecedented situation, certainly in this part of the world. Sönke, so my question to you now, as I wrap up, is what is your view on the midterm future of your business and industry? You explained to us as if we needed more explanation of the importance of energy, of oil, of the role that oil and the carriage of oil perform. But given all of this and the main Russian operators, as you explained earlier, what's the midterm future?
Yeah, it's put it that way. If I could really predict the midterm future, and the first thing I would do is I would end the war, if I had the power to do that. War is never a good thing. Crisis creates disruption. Yeah, we're sitting here because there's a major disruption today. Everybody knows where the oil prices went because of this disruption. We do know that we need to find a way on how, in one way or the other, to stop this war effectively. So there are sanctions that are coming with it. That means for us restricted operations, restricted flow of oil, restricted business with that. It comes straight together this. So the question is, in a nutshell, how long will it take? I will not know how long it will take. Let's assume it takes longer meaning I think it prolongs, let's say by 6 months, just take it from that perspective, till some agreement has been reached on one way or the other. Actually, we will not see the prices going down of oil. In Malta, we don't see it at the moment, but what we do see is that with the high prices today, there is no incentive to store any oil to start with, to store. So because today it costs me 1,000, tomorrow, I don't know, it most likely costs you actually even more or less, I don't know. So there's a big insecurity, and especially with regards to the oil itself. Is it Russian oil? It's not directly sanctioned today, but what happened if? So if I have 20,000 tons of oil in my tank, which I just bought, how long will it stay there if the sanctions are coming into place? Who will ever buy it? So what happens automatically? Nobody buys already the oil. So what we see is, I have never seen our tanks so empty. We are historically low on stock levels. Our clients themselves, they don't find oil. If I want to put it very simple, even if they want to buy, they don't find. So we have an extreme shortage in product. It's hand to mouth. So will it continue? If this continues, this situation itself, now the market will regulate itself. There will be different sources of oil. It's not that there's only Russian oil.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the market will take time to adjust. So I'll give you an example. Will that oil be, and I'm talking oil, I'm not talking only crude oil, I'm talking about refined oils, anything that comes with it. Will it come from India? Will it come from the Middle East? Most likely. But it takes time to adjust these new sources. Even the traders, for example, that are used to Mediterranean trade, they don't have supply contracts with those countries, yeah, or they don't have contacts. So all this bridging takes time. So I'm sure if it takes longer, we will see definitely a shift of sourcing of materials, which also means that the shortage will remain. So it means the prices will stay high. So it will not change. We will not see a price change in the future. That's what I believe in the mid future. It will stay high because there will be competition for product. We already see it on LNG. There's competition for product. There's competition for supply. Yeah, it's like I pay you a little bit more. So it will not. I'm not saying it looks bad. I think we will still be running up and running, but with the present situation, I believe we have to live for quite some time. And I think that's why it is important that we have a very coordinated effort on also complying with the rules that are there. And I'm just raising it because it doesn't mean that if something comes from the Gulf as a product, that it really comes from the Gulf, right?
Exactly.
So let's make that very, very clear. So it will get more and more sophisticated on how we need to monitor. Are these really Russian oil molecules, for example, that are coming? What's the definition of that? So there's quite a road ahead,
Yeah.
I think, for all of us. Comes with the legal application of it, what clauses are there. By history, we always had good sanction clauses in our contracts. That's a lesson from Iran. Yeah, we learned it from there. So we are contractually very well protected, but we have to be alert of the future on how this really works, if we want these sanctions to work.
Well, thank you very much, Sönke. As you were speaking, I couldn't help thinking, and as we are speaking about, the duration, how long is it going to last? I have to say, I couldn't help thinking about when we first, very famous day, I believe it was the 24th of February, when there was possibly the Russian expectation that this was going to be a quick in and out, and that it was going to last a weekend. And February, March, April, May, 3 months later, we're still there. They are still there. The war is still on. So do you think that people in the trade were delaying taking these decisions because there was the hope, the anticipation that this wouldn't last? Have people now come to understand that, hey, this is certainly not a quick in and out. This is going to last, and perhaps we need to start looking at the longer term, as you said. So probably there is that people are going through this thought process. When I say people, I mean obviously traders and persons in the industry.
There's a delay in reaction. There was always the hope,
Yes.
What's going to happen, either it's going to stop or it's going to continue. But I mean, it's supply chain disruption to mend it
Yes.
takes
Of
time.
course.
Yeah, and with that you have the shortage. So there was a big shock, and I believe people are starting to understand that they will have to live with the situation for longer, and
They
that also for their
anticipated.
own existence. What's next? Maltese tankers can't carry Russian oil? Then well, let's see what the Maltese tanker owners will do. It goes further and further and further.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sönke. And Adrian, I am fully aware of the fact, because you will tell me when we go back to the office, that I reversed your questions. I apologize for that.
No
but,
problem.
but you
No
went through
problem.
that. So now, and perhaps it's a different take. What can or should, therefore, shipping companies do to ensure that they don't fall foul of the sanctions?
I mean, we've heard from everyone in this panel that everyone in the shipping sector has to be careful of its exposure to sanction risks. I think the first thing, and I think Neville explained it quite well, is education. So I think all economic operators, particularly in the shipping sector, in the industry, should seek to get a robust understanding of what are the sanctions and what are their responsibilities, their obligations. People, when we think of sanctions, people don't realize the different categories of sanctions. There are sanctions against designated persons, there are sanctions against trade in particular areas, embargoes on cargoes, even provision of certain services. So it's important that people become knowledgeable about what sanctions are enforced and which sanctions actually apply to them. So Neville explained, so EU sanctions and UN resolutions become law in Malta. But those are not the only sanctions there are. There's OFAC sanctions, there's now UK sanctions. And it's important that Maltese operators understand that, just because they are Maltese operators, does not mean that these might not apply to them. In fact, it's, I think, probably the Sanction Monitoring Board approach to always recommend that operators also comply with other sanctions, because through their activity, through the fact even that they have a dollar account, which is obviously used, the currency used in shipping, they could fall within the scope of other sanctions. Secondly, it's important as well that, and we've heard this, that the economic operators take a risk-based approach to how they undertake and carry out their business. They need to assess what their risks are and implement due diligence measures to mitigate those risks. And I think Neville again said it correctly. There's no one size fits all, and everybody has to put in their own internal policies and their own procedures, taking into consideration their size, their activity, who the players they deal with are. So that's important. And I think the last thing, and I will close on this, and it's probably a cardinal rule that economic operators should definitely keep in mind, is that what was good last week is not good tomorrow. And, it's not enough for you to have a client who's a repeat customer and you're going to offer him the exact same services or the same provisions you did last week, to say, I'm not going to do my homework, I did it last week. The rate at which sanctions are, being imposed and the things are changing, you cannot risk, and obviously bearing in mind the consequences, economic, legal, and reputational, even criminal, of breaches, you cannot afford to take that risk. So, obviously, it might sound like a cliche, but when in doubt, you should seek proper legal advice. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Adrian. We've come to the end of this webinar. I do apologize for the 40 minutes extension, but I am sure you will all agree that it was worth an additional 14 minutes because all our panelists gave some pretty interesting insight into the subject matter that we chose for our second series webinar, Shipping and Sanctions. So my real thanks and appreciation for making time, Neville. I know you are all hugely busy people. So on behalf of Fenech Fenech, I would really like to thank you, Neville Aquilina, David Bugeja, Alex Montebello, Sönke Stein, and of course, Adrian Attard. Thank you, participants, for joining us. Before we leave, I would like to draw your attention to the facts. I'm sure you already know about them, but I think it is perhaps worth underlining that the Sanctions Monitoring Board has also issued on the 27th of April a very interesting frequently asked questions regarding Russian vessels, the do's and the don'ts, with various questions. And I have to say that it really is a hugely useful guide. As Adrian said, this is no substitute to obtaining professional legal assistance. There are several service providers who are very capable of providing this assistance. It is our job and our duty, and as we've all agreed, precaution is better than cure. On that fine note, may I wish you a very good afternoon, and I would like you to follow our social media. This will be available on this whole episode will be available on our social media, and do please look out for our future webinars. There are another 2 coming up throughout the year, and it would be our great pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed.